Hello, this is Pauline Jennings. Welcome to Musician Talk. Ethan Freier is a band director, writer, arranger, and freelance trombonist based in St. Paul, Minnesota since 1987. Since 1998, he has been a concert and jazz band director in Northfield. Ethan earned the prestigious Performer Certificate from Indiana University, where he got his Master's of Music degree. He can be heard regularly with Synergy, one of the most awarded cover bands in the Twin Cities, with the JazzMN Big Band, and with the group he started, the Freier Department. As a trombonist, he is in demand as a freelancer in the Twin Cities and has shared the stage and performed with numerous incredible musicians such as Kenny Rogers, Connick Jr., Aretha Franklin, Natalie Cole, Barry Manilow, Michael Bolton, Ray Charles, and many, many more music celebrities. Phew! And wow, what a list. I want to hear all about it. Let's talk to Ethan Freier. Hi, Ethan. How are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. Welcome to Musician Talk.
Thank you for having me. This is really an honor and a pleasure.
Thank you. So, as I do with all my interviews, as my regular listeners know, I feel it's important to chronicle how people, in this case musicians, have handled the restrictions and distancing involved with COVID. What have been your greatest struggles and triumphs over the last, it's 10 months now?
As a music teacher, that part of it is a struggle just because teaching over Zoom, while it can have moments of being successful, it's very inefficient.
Yes.
And it's frustrating in that way. And if you have ever tried to explain to a sixth grader how to put a spring back on their flute key over Zoom, you can understand. I could do it myself in 5 seconds, but trying to explain it. So those kinds of things are frustrating. But, honestly, one of the only silver linings maybe about music education right now is that students have more time to practice than they'll probably ever have in the rest of their life. So I'm encouraging students to work at take advantage of this time and because they do have a lot of downtime right now.
Right.
As far as my performing is going, I haven't done any performing for a long time, since before COVID struck. The most frustrating thing is that I've been writing a lot of stuff for my band, and I haven't felt comfortable getting everybody together to play through the things. And I don't want to record the things until I've at least had us run things down to see if there are some things I need to fix before we record,
Sure, right.
And also with the kind of year that we've had, sometimes it's hard to get myself in the right space where I want to write, where I want to create things. I'm just more dealing with the world.
Right.
So,
and knowing it's just going to sit there perhaps, and for how long before you can bring it to the group. So my question I thought of right away is, okay, so are you practicing more?
well, I have to tell you, as a brass player, you really can't stop practicing if you intend on continuing to perform. So there was a stretch this summer where I took quite a break from it, but I'm back on it now. And, I love to practice. I love to play. So that is one of my outlets during this time. Even if I'm by myself, it's still cathartic in a way. So.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully, fingers crossed that by this summer, we'll be able to perform again live and get together with our friends and practice. So now I want to take you way back from these last 10 months to the beginning of your musical journey. And I'm wondering what your first musical memory is as far as being a performer or playing music yourself.
My mother is a organist and piano teacher. And so I took piano lessons from her growing up. So my first experiences were probably taking piano lessons from her. My parents still play every day, by the way. My dad is
that's great.
88, and my mom's 87, and they play duets for an hour every day.
Oh, that's great. What a great thing to do together.
Yeah. So he plays trombone and she plays cello, and they play duets. So that's my earliest experience was piano lessons. But I have to admit, when you take lessons from your parents, sometimes that's not the most...
I was going to ask about that.
thing. I learned some things, but I didn't learn as much as I wish I would have.
How old were you when you started taking lessons from your mom?
I would say it was probably 7 or 8, something like that.
Very young, yeah.
I've had piano teachers tell me that if a child is able to read, then they
Right.
can start reading music. But I started playing trombone when I was in fifth grade, and I remember there was a song in our lesson book called Shenanigans, and it was a and it was a trombone kind of feature thing. And I and my band director in fifth grade thought it'd be cool for us to play it and have me play the trombone part on it. And I thought it was great, and I'll never forget it because it was the first chance I was sort of featured. Now when I look back on it, I think, wow, that was a pretty cool opportunity that I had.
It kind of lit the spark, maybe.
Yeah, well, for some reason, early on liked improvising and liked playing the blues. And I mean, even in junior high, I remember learning the blues and playing the blues. And that was kind of my first step into improvisation was the blues. I also remember when I was in fifth grade that we got a little pin for every time we got to
Level.
another level. Thank you. And one of the levels was to learn your B flat concert scale, and then another level was to learn like three scales, and then there was another pin for all 12 scales, and nobody else in fifth grade was doing that, but I thought, well, sure, and so I did it. And so I'd tell my students in middle school, say, you can, I'm not any smarter than any of you are. I just decided that it was something I wanted to do.
Right. Spend the
Yeah,
time to do so. Right.
exactly.
I'm interested in improv, that came at such a early age, because it feels like that should be something that comes later, because you have to have such intimate knowledge of scales, not just know them and be able to play them, but really have an intimate knowledge of that. So was it just by ear?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, it really was. I mean, I knew the scales, but
Sure.
when you're improvising, there has to be this weird marriage of the thoughts that are in your head with the facility that you have on your instrument. I
Right.
mean, I'm sure there weren't solos that were very impressive, but the idea that certain notes work and certain notes don't work, and that you can just create something spontaneously, for some reason, was never really difficult for me.
My guess would be that you're a risk taker musically, because it's risky to improvise, because it's really hard.
I just saw an article the other day. It was very interesting. We talk a lot in music education about the benefits of the arts, and how they play into brain development for students across the board. And the brain is more active in more regions of the brain when you're playing a musical instrument than any other human activity. And
Wow.
then they put the electrodes on someone's brain while they were improvising, and it was even higher.
What I read is that it actually, when somebody's improvising, as well as all the parts of the brain being turned on, like when you're not improvising, it turns off the portion of your brain that you judge yourself. And
Oh,
so
interesting.
I know, isn't that interesting?
It's very fascinating to me. Anyway, I'm sorry to digress, but I'll continue on my musical journey.
Yes,
So,
please do.
in high school, I had a high school band director that was a big influence on me. I was in the high school jazz band, and in Jackson, Minnesota is where I grew up. So it was a small town, but I look back on it now, and actually, we had a pretty good jazz program. And my best friend in high school, or one of my best friends, is the bass player in the thrash metal band Megadeth, who are internationally
Wow.
enormous.
Yeah.
He was the bass player in my jazz quintet in high school,
Oh, that's great.
and so I had some good experiences there. And then I was in all-state band when I was a sophomore or a junior, and the first four trombone players in that band were it was me and I forget his first name now, Zimmerman, the guy he teaches trombone at St. Olaf, or did until a couple years ago.
Oh, I can't help you
Or,
there. Mr.
and
Zimmerman, his first name, Mr.
Yeah, Mr. Zimmerman, exactly. And then Dean Sorensen, who's the head of jazz studies at the University of Minnesota, was one of the trombone players. And the other guy, his name is Rob Arthur, who moved to New York, and he's a very famous producer of everybody. He's
Wow.
huge. So it was really cool for me to meet all those people, because coming from a small town, I had no idea some of the things that went on in the rest of even in the metro area, in the cities.
Sure.
And then I decided to go to college at UW Eau Claire, because I went to Shell Lake Jazz Band Camp, which is actually a place that I teach at every summer now. One of the teachers there at that time was Dominic Spera, and so I was talking to him about schools, and he said, well, you should go to Eau Claire. But it was about the right distance from where I grew up that it wasn't too close to home and it wasn't too far away. And
Nice.
so it was a really good fit for me. And I got some great experiences there and started playing. And I played in an R&B band that played every Tuesday night for 2 or 3 years. And I played in a big band that played every Monday night. And I took some arranging class and I was able to start doing some writing and arranging. And then I decided when I graduated with my music ed degree that I was already poor, so I might as well remain being poor for a little longer. And so I went to get my master's degree from Indiana University in jazz studies. I did that really quickly. It was done in a year and a half, and then came back up to Minnesota. And I was married at that time, and it was time to come back home.
When you came back home, where did you move to?
We moved to St. Paul. When I came back, I took a 1 year long-term sub job at New Prague schools. I taught in New Prague for 1 year. Lots of students and lots of work, and it was a first job. And honestly, when I got done that year, I thought, maybe this isn't what I want to do. And so at that point, I was starting to play more and more gigs, and I knew I could build up a private studio if I wanted to and all that. So soon after that, we started having kids, and I was stay-at-home dad. My wife worked at Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Minnesota, and she was climbing that corporate ladder, and I was playing 200 nights a year and
Wow.
playing lots of Broadway shows, lots of salsa bands. For a while there, the same contractor hired the pit orchestras for the Ordway, the State, and the Orpheum theaters. It was all the same guy, Steve Lund. And I got in tight with him, and I was working a lot.
That's great.
So it was good. And then I was taking care of our 3 kids and washing a lot of diapers because we decided that environmentally we didn't want to use disposable ones. So at one point I realized I had washed 15,000 diapers.
Okay, I started with that, but I gave it up. When I had my second, I said, no, I'm doing this.
Anyway, so that was going really well. There's a cover band called Synergy that I still play with now that I've been in for about 30 years.
Wow.
And we've traveled all over the world. I've gotten to play some really fun places and, see some really great things. And then at a certain point, my wife, who was climbing that corporate ladder, as I mentioned earlier, she hated her job and she just couldn't stand it. And finally, one day she said, I'm really going to need to leave that place. And so in this transitional time, at least, you're going to need to find a job with benefits. So
ain't that the truth? So much depends on those benefits.
Exactly. And so I blew the dust off of my teaching license, and this was like the middle of the summer. And so most teaching jobs fill up in like April and May.
Right.
So Northfield had a .4 job opening. And so I thought, well, I got to start somewhere. So I applied for the job in Northfield. And then by the time I get to the interview, somehow it had turned into .5, which was great because then I was at the threshold where the benefits would kick in.
Oh, good. Yes.
So they hired me. And then by the time school started, they had found another .2 for me. So I was .7. And then by Christmas, they found another .2. I was .9. And then
you're like, we want to keep this guy busy.
I guess. And so then the next year, I was full time. And now this is my 22nd year teaching in Northfield. So
what a great recap. A lot of questions came up as you're telling me about your musical journey. The first one was, why did you want to be a teacher?
Pragmatism. I knew then that if you really want to play, if you just want to play, you really don't need to go to college for that. Find people you want to study with and study, but you don't necessarily need to get that college piece of paper. But I thought, well, if I'm going to go to school, I want to have something that I can fall back on if I need to. And luckily for me, I was correct. And it's been great. I mean, I love teaching. I love performing too.
Well, how blessed you've been. I mean, it's like you've had this perfect kind of combination of teaching and playing that you can do both.
Yeah.
A lot of people aim for that.
I mean, I'm not going to lie. When my wife first came home and said, you need to find a job. But on the other hand, I was working all the time, and you really have to work a lot to make even a measly income. My friends and I will joke sometimes that, last year was the 50th anniversary of the $100 gig.
And you don't get benefits.
Which is a tough thing in this country.
Yeah. All right, so we need to move on. I'd love to keep talking about all this, but I would like to get to your first song, which is called FD Shuffle. And FD stands for the Freier Department, which is a very, very clever name because your last name is Freier, for those of you that forgot. Tell us a little bit about that band. You didn't bring that one up in your
Well,
synopsis.
this is the most exciting thing for me because for years, the band I mentioned earlier, Synergy, I wrote all the arrangements for that band, and everything
Wow.
that band does was written down. So we'd never rehearse. Everybody reads, music great, and so we would just come right in and just
Wow.
nail it. And so I've written maybe 5, 6, 700 arrangements for that band, and
Ethan.
so
Wow.
there were certain parameters I had to follow. It
Sure.
had to be something that was playable the first time through. So I would keep things pretty simple. I got used to writing those things with those parameters, and it has been so fun to just write whatever I want. And this is the
Nice.
first time I've been able to do that. I've written lots of things for young jazz ensembles. The grade 1 and grade 2, really kind of beginning band things are the things that sell the best, and that's really what they encourage me to write. But that means you have really definite range limitations and technique limitations and whatnot. But now I get to write, like I say, whatever I want, and I know who I'm writing for, and so technically it can be as difficult as I want it to be, and I know they're going to be able to play it.
This is one of the songs that you wrote for the group, the Freier Department.
Exactly, and it's the FD Shuffle. Everything I'd written was funk tunes and rock tunes, and I thought, well, I know that this band can swing because all these guys can swing, so I wrote FD Shuffle. So
Awesome. Perfect setup. Let's take a listen to the FD Shuffle by the Freier Department, led by Ethan Freier. Pauline Jennings, and you're listening to Musician Talk, hosted by me. You just heard FD Shuffle, played by the group The Freier Department, featuring my guest, Ethan Freier, as composer and playing trombone. When I listened to this, I felt like it sounded like a soundtrack for, or perhaps a theme song for a very hip detective show. That's what came into my mind. So, but I love how the melody reemerges and kind of sneaks out after the drum solo. It's just wonderful. Who are the musicians playing?
Saxophone player is a friend of mine who's a guy I worked literally 5,000 gigs with. His name is Rich Manick. And on trumpet was Dr. Adam Rossmiller, also a good friend. And the rhythm section was Chris Olson on guitar. And then on bass, I have Dick Headland. He's in the Minnesota Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with a couple different groups. He's a good friend, and I've played with him for a long time. And his son, Jordan Headland, is the keyboard player. And Jordan and his dad have a studio, and so we've been able to do a little recording there and stuff too. And then the drummer who you heard on that, playing the solo on that last song, is Dave Schmallenberger.
I'm wondering about your process for songwriting because Prolific doesn't even cover it. But I just want you to kind of walk me through your process.
It varies from tune to tune,
Okay.
honestly. Lots of times I'll start with a bass line, and then everything will build from there. Because if the bass line is right, and if the groove is right, then the rest of the tune is going to work, you know? And so lots of times that's how it starts, or sometimes I will just have a melody in my head and I go the other direction and I start from the melody. So I'm writing a tune right now, actually, and I wanted to start it with all horn stuff. So I wrote the horn solely and then discovered what the harmonic progression is that would work underneath that. And then I started writing out the rest of it, and then it just kind of pieced together. I do everything on Finale, so I can kind of put down a chunk here. That's a music notation software for listeners that don't know. And so I can put a chunk of it down here, and then I can, if I think, you know what, I might use that somewhere, but I don't want it here. So then I just copy that and I paste it somewhere else and leave it there.
Nice.
And then I come back and come and get it later. And it is helpful to have notation software that will play back what you've written so you can kind of get an idea roughly what it sounds like.
So you can plug in the type of instrument that's going to play the note on the page?
Yes.
Wow, that's huge for songwriters to have that tool. Yeah.
It is. And again, it doesn't sound like real instruments, and they aren't real high quality, virtual instruments, but it's good enough so you can kind of get an idea.
In your songs, both songs that we're playing today, there's solos. In the Freier Department, you bring a song to that group where you have a little bit more leeway. How do you decide who's going to solo, particularly when you're going to record?
I try to spread it out. I know that everybody in the band is a good soloist, but I also know that there are certain tunes that I just kind of have a feel that this person is going to sound good on this tune, or is going to have fun with it. Actually, I'm more interested in them being enjoying themselves.
Nice.
As this outlet, because again, so far at least, this isn't a real big money maker for anybody. So if they're not having fun, then it's not gonna work out. And when we play things live, we'll have probably more solos than I would put on a recording. But
yeah, we already talked a little bit about the way the brain works with music and how important music is to the brain and how helpful it is because it turns on more parts of the brain, like you said, than doing almost anything else. So we talked about that, but I'm just wondering if you can tell me 2 ways that music matters in your personal life and 2 ways you think that it matters in a community.
Interesting questions. In my life, I find it as a really good outlet. I feel like I miss it if I don't have it for a while. I almost am addicted to it,
Yeah.
It's like the endorphins or the chemicals in your brain that are released when you're playing, especially when you're playing with other people, becomes something that you crave, I find. And honestly, I feel like it's something that I can share with people that will bring joy to them too. As far as the importance in the community, I think that a lot of people have relied on their favorite playlist, during COVID to kind of, just to help get through this stuff, and all the different things happening politically and societally in our country right now. I think it's good for people to have something that they can listen to that can kind of help them maybe forget about what's going on right now, or help them deal with what's going on right now in a different way, you know.
Right. So it's time to move on to Beluga Boogaloo, which is the second song that you chose for playing today. And I want you to tell me a little bit about that.
I had been listening to quite a bit of New Orleans music at that time,
Mm.
and then I got the bass line in my head, I got the groove in my head, and it just kind of fit together. I don't know. Creating is such a weird thing because there, you know, of all the different people I've played with and all the different gigs I've done in my life, I've just got all these. This might sound silly, but I just have all these little fragments of melodies and whatever in my brain, and sometimes they kind of coalesce.
Oh, that's not silly. That's wonderful.
The only reason I called it Beluga Boogaloo was because I kind of like the way those two words sound when you say them right after each other.
Exactly. It's fun to say. You're good with names. That's a wonderful name. I love it.
Most of the things that I've recorded so far have been just kind of rough takes. And so that's why I can't wait to get past COVID so that we can go in and do some good takes.
This is also the Freier Department playing this song, right? Yeah,
Yes.
Same group, same musicians. All right.
Yep.
Well, let's take a listen to Beluga Boogaloo. You're listening to Musician Talk, hosted by me, Pauline Jennings, with guest Ethan Freier. And you just heard the song Beluga Boogaloo by his band called the Freier Department. Now, this tune instantly made me smile. When people write songs where the whole band is playing exactly the same thing, Pat Metheny does that throughout his songs. And I always love that. It's like my favorite part of the song. And you do that in here where everybody, even the drummer, is playing right with everybody else. I love that. So thank you. It produces some kind of drama that's different from when people are playing different things in a different way.
Good. I'm glad you liked it.
I want to move on to the weekly worst gig, best gig section of the show. And so what comes to mind when I say worst gig?
For a while in my life there, I just never turned down anybody if they called me. And there was a German band that I said, sure, I'll do it. I showed up and I was subbing for another trombone player and we all had to wear lederhosen. And I had to wear the lederhosen that belonged to the regular trombone player who wasn't there. And he was, I'm sure, close to 300 pounds. So these lederhosen that I had on, I looked like I was wearing a barrel. I mean, it was just insane. And we're playing these polkas and stuff, and it was so comical that I just could hardly keep a straight face.
And usually the horn players are up front, so it's not like you could stand and hide behind an amp or a...
No, not in a polka band, in a German band. I'm right out there in front. It was something else. There are lots and lots of gigs that kind of fall into that category that I remember in my career. That's
a good one. Thank you. That was a good representation.
Exactly. My best gig, there's so many great gigs. I've had the opportunity to play with Aretha Franklin and Ray Charles and Harry Connick Jr. and Michael Bolton and Barry Manilow and
wow,
just tons and tons of great people. And when you get to see really, really skilled professionals doing their work, those are all just really cool experiences.
So instead of picking one, why don't you just explain to us maybe how you got those gigs? And when you say playing with them, you mean really playing with them. It's not like you shared the stage, right?
Well, correct. During that period when I was doing a lot of the Broadway shows and a lot of the, those same contractors would be the people who would hire the in-town talent that back up a traveling artist.
Got it.
So when Aretha Franklin comes to town, she brings her piano player and her drummer and her bass player probably and her backup singers. But then the rest of the group, the rest of the orchestra, if you will, is local musicians.
Wow. Okay.
And so I would get called to do those things. So we'd have a rehearsal in the afternoon, and usually the star wasn't there at the rehearsal at all. And then we would just see her that night, and their music director would run the rehearsal. Yeah, so that's how I got in there. And, one of the great things and one of the really scary things about that freelance world is that if you play well, you'll continue to get those jobs. Mm-hmm. If you don't play well, there are a lot of people waiting for that job.
Right. So, like if you have a bad night or something.
Yeah, well, or a bad 2 nights maybe, or sure. if you kind of tick somebody off. So the great thing about doing those kinds of shows with everybody who's there, A, they all play great, mm-hmm. and B, they're easy to get along with because nobody wants to go work with people who are a pain in the neck,
Right, right.
So I had a lot of great experiences doing that stuff, and I got to meet a lot of great people. And yeah.
Was it terribly nerve-wracking?
It could be. A couple times when I subbed on Broadway shows, those books are pretty difficult. That music is difficult, and usually they would have you come and sit through one show just to audit the show, and then the next night you come in and you play, and that's kind of nerve-wracking. You really got to be on your toes.
Well, that's great. What a lot of great stories you have. Thank you so much for taking the time today. What a joyous conversation. I loved it. Before we end our conversation, though, I want to ask you about where we can find you online and what we can find online.
EthanFreierMusic.com is my website.
And it's Freier.
That's correct.
You out there. Yeah.
Yep. At this point, I don't have a separate website for the Freier Department, so you would go there to find any information about that. And there are a couple little snippets, some recordings on there and stuff. And when I do get into the studio post-COVID and we get some stuff out, I'm hoping that those things will be on Spotify and they'll be on a YouTube channel that I've set up.
And your music that you write for students and bands?
They would find that at CHOS, KJOS,
Okay.
chospublishing.com. One of my songs the other day, my daughter said, "Hey, listen to this," and it was a song I wrote called Minnesalsa. And I usually think of my music as being played by younger jazz ensembles, but this was a group in Madrid, Spain, and the youngest guy in the group was probably 60. So it was
Wow.
really kind of funny.
Yay. That is awesome. How exciting.
I'm not a star and I'm not wealthy, but it is kind of cool that somebody in Madrid enjoyed playing my music. So
Absolutely. And what a perfect, perfect place to end. I want to thank you so much for coming on and being so delightful today. Have a great 2021.
well, thank you so much for inviting me. This has been really fun. You have a great year as well.
All right, thanks.
Bye.
So many thanks to Ethan for joining me for this terrific conversation. And so many, many, many thanks to you for listening to Musician Talk on the One, KYMN. Have a terrific day.